Law Philip Porrick, son of Eve. Happy St. Patrick's Day. My name is Owen Feeney, and I'm Ireland's Consul General to New South Wales. And it's my pleasure to welcome you this evening from Ireland House here in Sydney, the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. On the eve of St. Patrick's Day, the Consul General of Ireland is delighted to partner with New South Wales Library in presenting this evening's In Conversation between Daniel Browning and the acclaimed Irish author John Connell. One of the best things about my job as Consul General is sharing Irish literature and new Irish literature indeed with Australian audiences. Our Irish literature is enjoying a bit of a renaissance and a revival at the moment, and many young Irish writers are making a breakthrough internationally. But it's not often that I get to share and present the writings of an author who has such familiarity and love and respect for this country, for this land and the people of this land, and indeed one who is a Walkley Award-winning journalist and broadcaster. So I'm really excited about this evening's event. As a confirmed Dubliner, or Jackeen as we're called, I was a bit apprehensive picking up John Connell's last book, which was The Cow Book, and it was a bestseller. So when it came to his new book, there was a little bit less trepidation on my part as a very bad amateur runner. It's full of great tips on stretching and pacing yourself, all things I need to learn in running and in life, indeed. But honestly, if you've never run in your life, you will still enjoy this very much. It is full of beautifully crafted prose that skips and runs through the lines and across John's chapters. It really is a jog through Irish history, and that history spans everything from early Celtic years through Ireland's independence and struggle with colonialism and run-ins with the Catholic Church, you could say as well. It's a book that I think for many of us Irish people who are in Australia at the moment or maybe feeling a little bit homesick will be kind of soup or comfort for the soul. Think of it like a big milky cup of Barry's tea. It's a very soothing book to read, and I think just what we all probably need right now as well. If you're an Australian who is wanting to travel to Ireland, I think you're also going to enjoy this book hugely as well. And it will leave you really full of intrigue and excitement for your visit. And indeed, it'll put Longford, John's home county, on the map for a visit when you get there. As an Australian, you won't have to wait very long in this book to find John's graw of Australia or love of Australia. It jumps off the page and it's in there from very early on in the book as well. I'm going to leave you now in the very capable hands of the ABC's Daniel Browning. We're delighted that he agreed to chair this evening. And I want to thank, before I do that, Samantha and Rebecca and all of the team at the State Library for giving this opportunity to share the work of a great Irish author, as I said, on the eve of St. Patrick's Day. I think we're in for a wonderful chat or conversation this evening. Daniel and John have actually worked together in the past, they're former colleagues, so I think we are in for a bit of a treat. I'll hand over to you, Daniel, now, and thank you all again for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Owen, for that introduction. I should just quickly acknowledge too that I'm on the land of the Gadigal people here in Sydney and not far from the border with the Wangal Nation. I pay my respects to the Gadigal, to the Wangal, their ancestors and their future leaders. Yes, John Connell and I worked together in Sydney at the ABC, and I'm delighted to be talking to John Connell, the author. John, can you turn on your camera and turn on your mic? Great. Good to see you.
Everybody.
I'm looking a bit sweaty. I think it's my ring light, so I'm going to turn it away a little bit. Yeah, thanks so much for being there. It's early in the morning.
No problem. As Owen said, rightly said, I have a great graw for Australia. So anything Australian themed or to do with Australia, I'm always happy to take part.
We are also here on the eve of St. Patrick's Day, so hence my interview with you today for the State Library. I wanted to actually just quickly reprise something that you say in the running book. And it occurs to me that it's actually the best blurb I've read for the book. And these are your words: a marathon through my home, through my history, through memory as I know it, and as it has been passed down to me. There are many legacies in this book, part memoir, part essay, part kind of travelogue through rural Longford. It's a really storied place that you come from.
Yeah, I suppose, Daniel, it is. It's Longford is a very quiet place. It's if I was related to like something in Australia, it's like going to Albury Wodonga. It's not exactly on the map, but when one drills down into it, there's a lot of history there. There's a lot of stories, and not unlike Aboriginal culture, Irish culture for a long time was a very oral culture. So a lot of the stories, and literally in the book, a lot of the stories were orally told to me as I was a child, and they stayed with me. And I suppose on the face of it, I wanted to write a book about my love for running, but at the same time, I also wanted to write a book about colonialism and post-colonialism. And I ended up putting the two together in this strange essay-like format, but it actually made sense because as I moved through the landscape, these were the things that came to me. So it was an interesting journey. Even though it was a physical journey as well, it was a mental journey. But it is a land that has many stories, and in a sense I wanted to write some of them down before our elders passed away, before some of this stuff was lost.
I'll just say quickly that the connection here is prone to drop out, so if we do drop out, just a word to the audience that John's going to very generously read from the running book. There's a really interesting line in towards the end of the book where you talk about what happens when a memory evaporates, or when someone, and you're talking about a particular memory in relation to a neighbour of yours. And when the memory dissipates and you die, what happens to that memory? It's a fascinating kind of question.
Yeah, it's something I've thought about for a long time. Like in coming back to Ireland, I got to know more of the elder people of our community and hear different stories. And while I didn't recount them all, I did get quite a few. And I've always been fascinated with that question, but also similarly on a spiritual question: what happens to gods who are no longer, the faith is no longer practiced in them, And I think that those are questions of utmost importance in the now, because we have Indigenous cultures faced with struggles, but also rural communities faced with struggles of, well, what direction do they go in, and how do we remember but also move forward? So it's kind of I wanted to pose that question to the reader, like what would happen when this person, and in relation to that, I'm just talking about an ordinary man who I knew, but what occurs when he passes away, and how do we remember him? And I think living memory runs longer than physical life. It can span over 2-3 generations, but it takes a lot for something to be handed down past that, and you're getting into cultural attributes then. So there are, and I'm very conscious I'm talking to you, Daniel, so like the longest continuous culture in the world, so things are passed down quite readily, but they're not passed down as well here in some places. And that was a question that I wanted to pose to the reader, I suppose.
I guess, we all reach an age at which stories are passed on, and it's not something that happens, as children, we are not encouraged to listen to adults speak. We're certainly not brought into their world. It's the world of memory we inhabit later as blackfellas. some fascinating lines. I'm going to throw lines at you throughout this,
Yeah, go for it.
because the lyricism is extraordinary, and the sense of place also is quite fascinating. But going back to the cow book, I think you refer to it when you say this: farming helped me find the beauty in life. And you also talk about the expending of energy, and about the transcendence in cleaning out a cow shed, and similarly in running a marathon.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. The cow book. Yeah, there's a. If I can be frank, there's a passage with me moving cow dung or cow shit, and I talk about how it's like Zen monks raking the garden, and in a sense, it is. It's the same practice. It's just calming the mind and doing this, and yeah, I think there's a meditative aspect to all this stuff, and you know, I've just finished a new book, and I was reading a lot about Taoism and Lao Tzu, and it's the same stuff. It's about doing the practice knowingly, and he talks about the river, and it's something I've been thinking about a lot. He says the river, if a river comes across a big stone, it goes around it and eventually it gets through it. It doesn't need to crash into it. And I think that writing, in a sense, can be like that. It's about moving around an object and moving instead of trying to bulldoze through it. And yeah, farming did help me see the present moment and the beauty in things. And I suppose I'm conscious. I've just finished lambing season on the farm, and you know, you're bringing all this new life into the world, and it's beautiful. And you're eternally in the present moment when you're doing that. And then I suppose with running, it's a similar thing. I suppose it's all tied into mental health in some respect, Daniel. I had some mental health problems a number of years ago, and farming was a way back, running was a way back, and it's a way back to yourself, to find the center in yourself. And if you can do that, then you can I suppose, make your own road. You know, you can make your own track. But it came from a place of sickness and darkness to come to the light. But I think that it was a journey that was very worthwhile, and it was a journey that ultimately has given me 3 memoirs. There's a third one on the way. So that was a process of, and the running book, it was part of that. It's a process of making sense of a decade of life. And, you know, as we said at the outset, as much as the book is about Ireland, it's also about Australia, which has loomed so large in my mind since I went there when I was 20. So.
Absolutely. We renewed our friendship around the time both of us were experiencing some kind of loss, extraordinary personal loss. And then, you know, I wasn't surprised and was surprised to see how you kind of recovered and rebuilt. There's always that analogy in loss and in suffering, that we're like the foundation of something, and then slowly we have to rebuild. And this book is a great testament to a man who's rebuilt himself. I want to talk about, you know, this whole idea of the momentary and being in the moment. Because running puts you there. You say running as a philosophy teaches us to live in the present moment, to be in the now. And yet on this journey through your country, your place, you are always surrounded by the shadows of the past. You're not living in the moment. All these other influences are in your mind.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's funny. I heard David Malouf, who everyone would know, and David was my mentor when I was starting as a writer. But recently I read 12 Edmonton Street, his book about growing up in Brisbane. And in it, he talked about how a novelist or a writer can slow down 5 minutes and expand it into 500 pages or 50 pages. And that you can, in fact, travel through time in the novel in a way that I suppose music or a film couldn't do it, but it'd be very difficult to do it. And in a sense, I've been fascinated with memory and the present moment for a long time, and in particular, I've been fascinated with why do we make memories? How do we make memories? And I always remember, but I remember I was in Dublin a few years ago, and I was after being out for a few drinks with a friend, and I got on the tram, and I said to myself, I'm going to consciously remember this moment. And so I did. I created the memory, but otherwise there was nothing spectacular about the night, and I would have passed into the other world. I would have been gone. And I suppose I'm really interested in that notion of why do we remember certain things? How do we hold on to them? So often, John O'Donoghue, who was an Irish writer and poet, used to say that so often we remember only the bad things. And I suppose for me, with running, I wanted to remember the positive stuff. So I have this imaginary book in my head that I call the Book of Great Runs, and it's places that I've ran that fuel me, that give me insight into happiness. Rather than remembering bad things, I want to remember the good things. So, for example, in the book, I talk about running in the Blue Mountains in Katoomba to the waterfall with my friend Bob a number of years ago. But that's just a beautiful memory. I remember it so well. It was a beautiful day. We went and had a steak afterwards, and I created a positive memory. But then to your question of running through history, a lot of that memory of that history is sadly dark. I suppose the book is like this juggling act between the funny, happy stuff of I'm going for a run, I'm doing this, I'm getting the endorphins, to then the darker material. But I felt that it was important to talk about this darker material too, because that's what ultimately created Ireland and the Irish diaspora and the connections that we have around the world. You know, it's St. Patrick's Eve. There's 70 million Irish people in the diaspora. There's, you know, the Irish have made an impact in Australia. There's Irish Aboriginal people. It's a part of our story. But in a sense, Ireland has been in such a rush to get to modernity since independence that we've never stopped. We've never said to ourselves, what happened? What does all this mean? What really is our place in empire or post-empire? Because the country was, unlike Australia, the country was incredibly poor for so long. So it's modernity, you know, really the trimmings of modernity really only came with the Celtic Tiger, and people don't have to leave now. And so I wanted to ask those questions of ourselves, because it's interesting, I suppose, Daniel. Our president, Michael D. Higgins of Ireland, he recently has hosted a number of talks about called Macnas, and he's actually been talking about how we remember imperialism and how we remember the empire and our place in it. And he said that we had examined nationalism in Ireland a lot, but we hadn't examined the empire. And I suppose, in a sense, I actually sent the book to the president. I sent the book to the president through my publicist. I said we should send it to him, but because I was posing those questions myself, and I suppose I wrote those things in the book because I wasn't reading enough of those things myself, and I wanted to ask those questions. How do we sit with an uncomfortable history? And there's two parts to that. One is we were subjected to these things, but two, part of the society took part in these activities, and that's something that perhaps we don't talk about enough. You know, I'm conscious. There's a character I mention in the book, William Foster, in the chapter From Ballinolea to Byron Bay, and he ended up controlling 64,000 acres as a squatter in New South Wales. And of course, that wasn't just given to him. You know, there is a darker story to that, and he became the Premier of New South Wales. And he's Anglo-Irish, but at the same time he's still Irish. And his story is one that we don't talk about, because it's easier to talk about, well, Paddy went over and he had nothing, and you know, now he has a small farm, and he married an Aboriginal woman, and it was all great. And you know, while that did occur, there are the darker stuff that we need to talk about. And I suppose, yes, that was the reason that I wanted the history to sit aside, the present and the past to sit beside each other. And I suppose the present in the book is a way to bring joy to people. And I suppose that was inspired by Dr. George Sheehan, who was this runner and writer. And he said that, you know, you must make today your masterpiece. And I think that's what I wanted to bring across. I wanted people to read the book and feel like moving, you know?
Well, that's certainly the effect it had on me. I mean, I took to running. I'm a sprinter, not a marathon runner. Very short distances over a very steep ascent. But yeah, a sprinter, not a runner. I'm reminded of something actually that Cathy Freeman, the Olympic sprinter, once said. And she said, running is like breathing. It's almost like the juice of life. It's essential, and it's like a muscle.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. It's Sonia O'Sullivan who blurbed the book said, you know, running is life as well. And obviously Cathy Freeman is, well, I think Sonia and Cathy probably were contemporaries of each other around that time. Cathy is still arguably one of the greatest ever athletes that Australia's produced. And I think that it is. It's about what was the line she said again?
Running is like breathing.
Yeah, it is. I think. Yeah, it's funny. I for January I stopped running for a month, and it was for the first time in 7 years, and I was going walking, and I hadn't. What I'd done was I had taken the pleasure of the activity out of it, and so I took a month off, and I was walking, and I went back to running then, and I've just refound that joy and that purpose. And I think for me, running has the ability to turn any day into a good day once I get that run done. And I think a lot of people think like that with exercise. They think that this is a way to build a foundation for your day. And certainly for me, that's what running was. It was about building a new foundation. And I know that personally, when you and I met, I was 5 years ago when I went back to Australia. I was beginning that journey into physical fitness, and it turned into this great passion. And in a sense, I run many days to make sense of the day, but also I run to remind myself of joy and remind myself of life, and to be able to get into, you know, you hear athletes talk about getting into the flow state. And I think flow state is about where you're in the moment, you are free, and you're present. Because so much of our lives, we're projecting forward. If you're in work, you're talking about things that are going to happen or things I have to do. And the past, we can be fixated on the past as well. So I think that there are very few activities that get us right there in the moment, in the now. So I think being in the now is it's a wonderful thing. And I was actually reminded of I met Sonia during last summer. She was home in Ireland, Sonia Sullivan, the Irish runner, and I actually asked her, what do you think as much like when you were running, when you were in the races? And I was amazed, because I thought, well, she's a professional athlete, world record holder. She's not going to be thinking about anything other than running. She said, "No, I do think about things," and that was kind of blew my mind, and it made me realize that athletes are real people too. You know, we hold up athletes as gods, and some of them rightly are, but they're human beings as well. So that bit of reality made me feel a little bit closer to some of the greats.
We'll come back to that idea of kind of, it's clearing the mind, but also thinking about everything that happens, everything that has happened. When you're in that flow state, it's not as if you are, that your mind is silent. You're actually working pretty hard. But I want to talk about this idea of diaspora, which really strikes me as being almost a theme. And pretty much the core of the book is the fact that the island, was largely evacuated. I don't want to say that all Irish left Ireland, but a massive forced migration as a result of the famine and what you refer to as a willed genocide on the part of the British.
Yeah. It's, in the book, I call it 0 hour. And I didn't want to call it day zero because that's obviously the Pol Pot regime. I didn't want to be creating that connotation. It wasn't that. But yes, in a sense, all history starts and ends there in Irish history. There's pre-famine and then post-famine. And, it's interesting. I actually did an essay for BBC Radio 4 last week about cows. And I had to mention in it how even the landscape of Ireland changed after the famine in that there were more cattle than people. And so what the landlords did was they paid for people to be, for people's emigration to America or wherever on these coffin ships. And they put cattle where the people had been because it was easier to run and it was more profitable. And as a result, we're now the 5th biggest beef producing nation in the world. And it's a there's been a lot of, I want to be careful in what I say here, but there's been a lot of stuff about the famine and was it a genocide, was it not? The British policies at the time favoured market economics, and they said that the market would fix things. They got that wrong. Tony Blair, a number of years ago, wrote a letter which was read out by Gabriel Byrne, the actor, at a festival, and he acknowledged that Britain stood by while an enormous tragedy turned, while a natural disaster turned into an enormous tragedy. I suppose if it were, you see, the thing is, Daniel, it is happening now because we can look at Yemen, we can look at hunger there's hunger in the Horn of Africa. Last year, 9 million people died of hunger. It's sadly still a part of life. I think that it changed Ireland forever. It led to, well, it led to so much. I mean, the fact that I speak English is probably a legacy of the famine as well, because we decided that we were going to take part in the project of emigration, and that Irish wouldn't serve us, and that we would speak English and go to America. And I suppose the only thing that we could relate that to in the modern sense is the migration of Syrian people after or during the civil war in Syria at the moment, where 1 million people have left. That's the volume of people we're talking about. It's kind of unfathomable, the amount of people that would have left Ireland. And they kept leaving. It wasn't just after the famine or the famine years. They kept leaving. There's a point in the 20th century, in the early 20th century, the Irish population is only at about 3 million. It's now at 5. So I call it ours, rather than an empire of land or territory, it's an empire of memory. And there are people all over the world. And, you know, as Owen would probably say, the tower in Sydney is probably going to turn green, or the Opera House is going to turn green tomorrow. That just shows how far we spread throughout the world. I think that the Irish influence on the world has been a wonderful one, but it did come out of a place of tragedy. And how we remember that is so important. And I suppose, in a sense, you know, I talk about it in the book about, I use the religious story I heard about the disciples seeing Christ after Easter. And I say, like the disciples seeing Christ after Easter, we must make peace with our scars, because in a sense, it's like a moment of reconciliation with what happened and where we are, because we were in such a rush to get to modernity, and market economics have ruled the day. And also Britain, up until Tony Blair made that apology, wasn't in a place to make an apology either. So it's kind of we had to heal ourselves. And they say it takes 6 generations to heal from a famine or a genocide. So we're now at about the 6th generation. So it's still there. I suppose the really interesting thing for me with that is there are no stories passed down from that time, and there are stories from before the famine. And I know myself, like my father told me about the British Redcoats marching through our land in 1798 when there was a failed rebellion. But when I asked him about the famine, he said his father never talked about it, nor his father. And for me, my grandfather was born in 1895 and his father was born shortly after the famine. So it's only 4 generations ago. So it's still very recent. But there's an omerta, because terrible things were done by us to each other. So, yeah.
There's a beautiful resonance in something you say in the book about, it resonates with a very great poet, Ujuru Nunakul, also known as Kath Walker. And she said, you know, we can't mourn the past. This is a paraphrase. I don't want to quote her. But the past is all about us and within. And it's something that you evoke in the book. You can't really run from the past. And this is a book about running from things and to things. But you can't really pretend the past didn't happen.
Yeah, you can't. It's all around us.
That's a beautiful idea, though.
It is, isn't it? Yeah, it's so. It took me a minute to process that, but it's really spot on. I think. You know, I went to Australia when I was 20, and I did a documentary on the Northern Territory intervention, and have a lot of Aboriginal friends, and I always have thought that we shared a lot in common, not just culturally, but through the burden of history. And the past is all around us, and it is a terrible thing at times. But then it's like that question, Daniel, you know, what are we just supposed to forget it? It's like we have to hold on to it, the good and the bad. But I think we have to come to terms with it too, because we can't change it. You know, I'm conscious of Australia Day, and there was more renewed talk about Invasion Day, and then, you know, you read comments, very racist comments from people saying, oh, well, people are just going to get upset over another day if we change it to another day, which is not what changing the day was about. You know, it's that's not what changing the date is about. Yeah, history is it's a huge burden, isn't it? Or it can be. And sometimes I think our history is focused so much on the big stuff that we can forget the little stuff, you know. And you pick up a history book on Australia or Ireland, it's all the big stuff, it's all the negative stuff, but it doesn't tell you about Mary Riley, who lived down this lane, and how she lived her whole life, and how she had a great understanding of the world. We never hear about that. We never hear about the ordinary people and the ordinary lives. We only hear about the great brushstrokes. And in a sense, we lose a connection to what it is to be a person, a man or a woman, on a land in a certain time, because history is wrote after the fact, and we don't actually get to understand what it means until after that. And sometimes the historians who write these things are wrong, you know. I was conscious of Manning Clark, who wrote his History of Australia, and he finished the book in 1934. He didn't bother doing the modern era, you know. I think he was supposed to be the great eminent historian. But I think of a writer like Bruce Pascoe, who I absolutely adore. And Bruce has, you know, with Dark Emu, has wrote a book that tells an alternate history, a positive history, and one that wasn't known and yet was right there. You know, it was all wrote in these explorers' words. He was using the colonizers' words. So I think that history is this multi-layered thing. It's not just what's in the textbooks. Yeah.
There's a lot of joy in this book as well. And one of the things that brought me the most joy in reading was your reflection on the murmurations of starlings and that magic that happens in northern skies, in your part of the world, when starlings, those small birds, flock together and basically create these beautiful, evocative images in the sky.
Yeah, the transitions, the wave transitions. It's funny. I actually finished the cow book with a murmuration of starlings, and then I wanted to talk about it again in more detail in this book. And yeah, it's amazing, but it's literally like they say it's more akin to neurons firing in the mind. These wave transitions, they're called. So the birds, for our Australian viewers, the birds all move in unison, and they move like a shoal of fish, really, in the sky. And I came across some great articles about why it happened and how it happened, and why it happens. And yet the experts are still unsure as to how a bird 100 meters away from on the left to the one on the right knows to turn at the same time. And I took a literary risk, and I just said, you know, it's like a synapse firing in the mind, and maybe this is what a memory looks like, because the shoal is moving with memory and moving with intention and moving with purpose. And I suppose after everything that happened to me in the last few years with mental health problems and depression and things, I have a great store and a great value on happiness and a great value on beauty. And John O'Donoghue, who we referenced already, said that you must keep beauty in your mind. And I always think that keeping beauty in your mind is such an important thing, because we can find a way to appreciate the world we're in, and appreciate the present moment. And if we can't appreciate the present moment, we're not living, you know, we're not living, I think. And so hence the murmuration, it's a moment of beauty captured. And so often, with Ireland's not very populated, densely populated. So often when one sees these murmurations, you're seeing them just for yourself. And I think that you have to treasure those little moments. And I suppose that's the great thing about a phone. You can take a picture of it nowadays and remember it. So yeah, it's those are the things I talk. Haruki Murakami talked about that. He said memory is the thing that we burn, like the fire inside us to keep us going. And I think that positive memories are the embers that we can resort to on whether it's a cold Irish day or a rainy Sydney evening.
I just want to remind the audience that you can enter questions for John in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. It would normally be a comment section, but it's now called the Q&A box. We've got one question, but I want to ask you, John, before I pass you over to the audience and leave you at their mercy, about this whole idea of running as a spiritual exercise, and being the possibility of a meditation on life and some kind of transcendence, which I referred to earlier. I experience something like this in those very short bursts, those short runs of mine, that the spirit becomes important. We may, in our physical bodies, not leave much space for the spirit. And there isn't much space for the spirit, it would seem, in modernity. But you carve more space for that. Is running a spiritual exercise?
Yeah, I think it is, Dan. I suppose for me, I've had a spiritual, I don't want to say awakening, but I had a spiritual learning journey. And I think that it is both physical and mental and soul work. And I think that, I actually know a woman who does Qigong running or Qi running. I haven't seen it, but it's about, I was reading about it. It's about kind of being aware of yourself in the moment when you're running, which I suppose is like mindfulness. But yeah, I think that we could all do with leaving a little bit more space in our life for the spiritual, in whatever form that takes for you. And I'm conscious that I'm talking in Australia, a very secular country, and religion isn't talked about much, but spirituality certainly is. And I think that there is a hunger for the spiritual connection in everyone. And I suppose running was a way to access a different part of that. It's funny because I talk about the Navajo in the book, and the Navajo Native Americans, they actually treat running as a spiritual part of their day. So they start the day with a run, and it's not just to wake themselves up, but it's to be present in the world. They call themselves the Dina, the people of the land, and it's a way to be in the land. And I suppose, yeah, being in the Navajo Nation, that really crystallized that fact for me. And I remember I ran around Monument Valley for the book, and I felt totally alive and present, but also really at peace, and also very aware that I was in a very spiritual place when I was doing that, treating it with respect, of course, but very aware that I was in a sacred space, and you could feel that. And I remember I've been to Uluru twice now. I haven't ran around it, but I don't think I would. I treat it, it's more like a church to me, but that same sense of the spiritual is there. And I suppose there's something about physical exertion that can bring about a spiritual easing. It's just a fascinating thing, yeah. I hope I've answered that.
Yeah, that's an answer. I'll take it.
Okay.
Now we've got some questions from the audience. I think the first one: do you think that a comparison can be made between the 12th of July parades in Ireland, particularly in Belfast, and Australia Day celebrations? That's a very politically charged question.
Yeah. Wow. Well, there is a section of people who live in Ireland, and they have done so for a long time now. They are part of Ireland, or the island of Ireland, from the Orange Order and the Unionist tradition, and they are part of our story. and they're part of our community. So I would never renege someone from celebrating their culture. But I suppose in previous times prior to the peace that we now enjoy, there were occasions for certain activities that would have happened and made it difficult for people. I don't. You see, that's a huge question. It's a grenade question. I have lots of Protestant friends, so I don't want to be maligning anyone. But I think that I suppose that nationalism can be a tricky thing because it's about narrative and who controls narrative. And in order for one nationalism to exist, it can also create problems for people who are already there or for their form of nationalism. I think that Australia Day, look, my wife's Australian, we call it Invasion Day because we have Aboriginal friends and we're aware of the hurt that day causes. As a reminder, I always think of the fact that the shield is still in the British Museum of the first contact between Europeans and Aboriginal people in the modern era was a violent one. And that man, that warrior died. And yet his shield is still in the British Museum and it won't be returned. So it was a violent beginning and it has been a violent journey. It's not over. And I think that, I suppose my answer to you in short would be, I'd be really happy if the date stayed the same. The date could stay the same for me as long as the Uluru Statement from the Heart was accepted. But that, as you know, Daniel, probably isn't going to happen. But I think, I was very pleased to read about the Victorian move to analyze the effects of colonialism. I think it's just in the state of Victoria, but I read a very long article on the ABC about it last week, and I was really pleased to see that sort of process was happening. I think there's a lot of enlightened people in Australia now who want to have change, but the 12th and Australia Day, they're two different things and two very different scenarios. We have to find a way for all communities to live beside each other, but we have to be respectful of each other.
And as the smoke clears from that particular grenade, I'll move on to another question. In collecting your memories into the shape of a book, which comes first, the structure or the memories? In other words, did you think about placing your story in a historical context, or did that format surge from the writing?
Well, it's interesting, Daniel. I wrote the cow book in 2016, and a year later I wrote the running book, and the cow book hadn't actually come out yet, and the cow book came out in 2018. So I'd already wrote this second book, and it was a book about, I suppose it was a book about my passion, but it was also a book about making sense of another part of life. And it's taken me 3 memoirs. The third one is just gone off to the publishers at the moment, but it's taken me 3 memoirs to make sense of a life. And I suppose for the running book, the passion of running came first, and then the story became part of it. The story became part of it, and then it allowed me to build a framework. The journey, the marathon was the framework, and then I could put myself into it because I write about my own experiences. So yeah. Oh, just lost your audio, Dan.
Apologies, I muted myself and then, I wasn't speaking anymore. So this This listener says they went to Ireland in 1990, then returned in 2003. I didn't recognise the place. Do you think that the development of Ireland through the Celtic Tiger experience was on the whole a good thing or not?
Look, it brought lots of benefits. It's a very modern country now. Things, yes, I suppose. Like, I think you see people have an image of Ireland. It's the quiet pub. It's the Western Seaboard. Farmers in tweed caps. But at the same time, you know, we wanted a nice restaurant and a nice car and things like that. I think it has brought a lot of positives. Of course, there's parts of the traditional society have changed, but I think as a result of the Celtic Tiger and as a result of the economic wonder, apart from the GFC in 2008, a generation of young people can now grow up in Ireland and not have to emigrate to make a living. They can work in Ireland to have a job and a future. And I think that that's probably the greatest result of the economic boom that happened. Sadly, you know, in 2008, the country did go into a huge recession, and many people went to Australia and New Zealand and Canada. But those people are coming back now. And the wonderful thing about that is they're coming back with all these ideas. And even on a simple level, we've now got Australian style cafes in Ireland. So you can get your nice brunch. Owen, our Consul General, will be very happy to know when he goes back, he can have his poached eggs on sourdough toast. And I think that, you know, that's just the small level, but there's a number of cafes I know in Dublin, and these people went to Australia and got new ideas and new ways of thinking. And I live in a rural community, and I can see that the people who've come back want to bring a slice of that life that they enjoyed in Australia back to Ireland. So it's I think that it was a good thing. Obviously, when you race into modernity, certain things change. Some things stay the same, but certain things change. But that's modernity. Sadly, you know, I am aware that because of globalization, eventually every city looks like every other city. But I suppose that's our job in this generation, is to make sure that we can retain some of the nice cultural aspects of whatever country you're in, to make it feel like that country.
A last question, and that is, John, you have a pleasing voice. Did you read for your own audiobook? Any podcast plans?
Yes. Well, my voice was trained at the ABC in Sydney, and
No, it was cultivated in Longford.
Well, it was cultivated in Longford, but it was. I had to learn how to speak in Australia. Yes, I did do the audiobook, and it's available now. And yes, I'm actually in talks to possibly do a podcast with one of the newspapers here in Ireland. So that's in the works at the moment. So yeah, it's kind of it's I can't really get into it too much because it's still only in. I don't want to overpromise and not deliver, but I am working on it. And yeah, I mean, radio is where Daniel and I met. I have a great love for radio. I still think it's the most intimate of all the mediums, and because of podcasts now, we can bring the radio anywhere. So. And I suppose to your listeners, I actually listen to Australian radio every day still. I listen to conversations, I listen to big ideas, I listen to arts and ideas from the BBC, but I listen to a lot, and of course I also listen to Late Night Live. So I'm keeping up with affairs in Australia every day. So I'm probably one of the few Irish listeners every day, but I enjoy it. And you know, Australian radio is some of the best in the world, actually.
All right, so I'm going to finish up. We've only got a couple of minutes left, but I want to, again, talk about something that you finish on. It's not your words. These aren't your words. They're the words of a cousin who went to, I think he was a priest.
Yeah.
Father Frank Gray. And
yeah.
He was actually, you talked about Monument Valley. He actually went to, I guess, minister to the Navajo. in more recent times. He worked as a priest there on Guinea country. And he said, in journeying to a distant world, this is a letter I think he wrote,
Yeah,
in journeying to a distant world, one can see one's own world more clearly.
Yeah, I think Father Frank, who's still alive, he, in that letter, it's the most beautiful letter I've ever read, and he talked about how the Navajo worked turquoise the way the Irish work bog oak, and how we are both people of the land. And I think for me, in living for so long in Australia, I came to understand my own life much better when I returned. And a huge part of that was learning about Aboriginal culture. Not Torres Strait Islander culture. I don't know as much about it, but Aboriginal culture. And it gave me a foundation to understand my own life better. And I think that when we return with something, we can share it with other people then. And in a set, you know, not a week goes by that I'm not talking about Aboriginal culture or some mention of an Aboriginal story or a friend. And it has shaped my soul. And in a sense, when I'm writing about these things, I'm trying to impart some of that knowledge. Like, it's funny, I just finished the last book in this memoir series, and I'm not writing any more memoirs. And I was talking about the rock art in Newgrange in Ireland, and how we've lost the understanding of what the symbols mean. But I then looked at Aboriginal culture and I said, well, this half circle means a person sitting by water. This lozenge means this. And I said, maybe the answer to what our forebears wrote is hidden in Aboriginal culture. And it's something I've been thinking about a lot. I've been thinking about maybe expanding that into a whole book. But in journeying to the distant land of Australia, I learned what it was to be a writer and who I was. And I came back, and I've been sharing that now for a few years. But this last book is the end of that journey. And I've kind of been at a point for the last few months where I'm trying to figure out what is the next thing that I do. So yeah, it's interesting.
Well, good luck with it, John. We're going to lose you now, but it's been a pleasure to see your face and to hear you talk, and always a pleasure to read your work. And I want to thank you for writing the running book. And it's so good to see the rebuilt man before me.
Wow. Thank you, Daniel. And thanks to the State Library and to the Irish Consulate General. And yeah, and thank you all for watching. And I hope everyone has a lovely evening. We'll get the day started here.
Thanks, John.
Cheers.